Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Katheryn Kos is an experienced nutritional therapy practitioner. She has a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling and disability studies. She is a full-time freelance writer and blogger with strong interests in health, nutrition, spirituality, relationships, and sexuality. Katheryn is the author of the book, Forties On Fire, Honor Your Moods, Rediscover Your Sexuality, Thrive Through Your 40s. She lives in upstate New York with her 2 boys, dog, and cat. She enjoys CrossFit, hiking the high peaks in the Adirondacks, and bass fishing with her boys. You can find her at www.primalmusings.com, on Facebook at Primal Musings, and on Instagram at Primal_Musings. Katheryn Kos, what a pleasure to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's such an honor. We're so happy to have people who tell us that it's okay if you're a big person to go and play. Why is that so important for you?
Oh my goodness. I feel like we just in general don't make time to play. We think, you're not a kid anymore. You're a grown up and you have to do all adult things. But I think that innate desire is still inside of you to just have fun and let loose and relax, and we're kind of pushed away from that a lot.
Sure. So what have been some of your favorite ways to play recently?
Well, I actually started ju-jitsu back in November, and that's really been fun because you can kind of get silly and playful with that. And then I enjoy being outside with my kids. We enjoy having like impromptu dance parties, that kind of stuff.
I love it. I was on your Instagram page and I saw you guys doing some fishing recently. So in the intro, that wasn't any hyperbole. Like you were actually out there catching fish. That's great.
Yeah, we love that. We come from a fishing family. My father's really into fishing, and he really instilled it in us. And then we kind of passed it on to the kiddos. And my younger son has really taken a big liking. He likes it a lot.
Oh, that's great. I love it. And just from the pictures of where you are, it looks absolutely beautiful up in upstate New York. Is that correct?
Yes, upstate New York. It's so beautiful here, except the winters are a little bit too long, and I would, prefer to be somewhere warmer during the winter. But I'm definitely a summer person. So.
Totally. Yeah, we can totally relate to that, of course. Well, you have such an interesting story, and I would love to, share that story with our listeners. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like growing up and some of the challenges you faced?
Well, I grew up with having just a lot of stress and anxiety. I didn't really know what was causing it as a kid, but definitely some childhood trauma. And it didn't really impact me physically until probably my early 20s when I started having issues. And I say physically, but also anything that impacts our body physically, there's also that, that brain connection as well. So I definitely struggled with anxiety, depression, things like that popping up that I, at the time, just considered it to be a condition without really understanding what might be going on deep down to connect to that.
How did you start to address some of those things?
I would say going to school, again, having this desire to learn a certain topic, but not really understanding where it stemmed from because I just didn't have that in-depth knowledge of myself yet. My undergraduate degree is in movement science, health, and fitness. And I grew up in a home where my mother struggled with obesity and depression and anxiety, and there wasn't really an emphasis on health. So I think that led me in that direction, wanting to have a different life. But it didn't really click. I was just like, oh, this looks like an interesting thing to study. I didn't really make that connection quite yet.
So how were you able to start to discover some of the root causes of the issues?
I think as I got older and I had children, and a lot of and I know I talk about this a lot, is autoimmune conditions in women. And a lot of these autoimmune conditions are triggered after having children, after giving birth and after having children. It's almost like a switch is turned on. You have those those autoimmune genes, but sometimes they're not triggered quite yet. And after having kids, a lot of health issues developed. So I started exploring different ways to improve my health to try to get to the root cause. And of course, I went down some not so great paths before finding a path that worked best for me.
It's interesting, there's definitely ways to kind of make this worse and, follow the wrong path. But it's also interesting that like once you're on the path, I don't really worry so much about people because at least they're aware of it and they will continue progressing, down the road, however long it takes them. And it's a pretty standard progression that I see a lot of people, starting out eating the standard American diet, and then they realize that that's, exacerbating a lot of the problems. And so they switch over to something like, a paleo diet or, vegan diet, vegetarian diet. Can you tell us a little bit about which ones you experienced in the beginning?
Yeah. So I started off when my children were really young. I read the China study, which is, very plant-based vegan agenda. And I thought it was like the Bible. And so I went, I was feeding my children soy. I was cutting out all meat and animal-based products and making these vegan desserts and, thinking I was doing the greatest thing ever. But my autoimmune conditions got worse and my thyroid became enlarged. And I was diagnosed with 4 different autoimmune conditions. And I was, on anti-anxiety medications postpartum, just a lot of physical and mental issues. I was just really struggling, and it seems to get worse when I switched to the vegan diet. So then that's when I actually went to a workshop that a local chiropractor was holding. And the workshop was on gluten and brain health. So it started with me, actually, I think he was talking about foods that irritate the gut, leaky gut and brain health. So he talked a lot about gluten, dairy, and soy being top offenders. So my first step after diving into vegan was to cut those foods out, and I noticed a huge difference. Then I started reading, that's when I think it was around 2012, 2013 when Rob Wolf really started springing up and paleo really started springing up. So I started a paleo blog called Primal Nutrition. And I started by blogging about my son's real food school lunches because I started to switch him over to a more paleo-based school lunches with meat and vegetables and berries. And I would take pictures of them in the little lunch box. And so there was a Facebook page called Just Eat Real Food. And they had, they're still a pretty big page with a lot of followers. And she would share his school lunches, and that really helps to kind of drive people to my blog. And my blog was mostly recipes at the time, like paleo recipes. I was doing a lot of cooking.
Were you getting any pushback from anybody? Was anybody like losing their minds that you were actually feeding your kids like food?
Yes, I definitely, especially my in-laws at the time, they thought I was giving, too much meat, and they weren't getting it. They were really stressed about the milk and the dairy because it's so stressed to drink milk in our culture. So that, I did get a lot of flack from all of that for sure. Wow. It was definitely not, it was definitely. And then I'd have a lot of angry vegans on my blog, on my Facebook page that I had to deal with. And it was definitely not the easiest. It's never easy when you're doing something that goes against what everybody else is doing.
I'm just curious about this. Have you ever encountered an angry carnivore? Like anybody following the carnivore diet? Have you ever seen an angry one?
I have not. I have not dealt with that yet. No. I know. And it doesn't seem, I'm not that into the carnivore community as much as I was into the paleo community. I just kind of do it for my own health at this point, but I'm not as engaging in terms of like that actively in that community. But I do find that it it can, any form of eating can become dogmatic and can become preachy. So I try to be careful of that, because in the past I had been like that when I was paleo. And I'm primarily meat based now, but I have added a few things back in, and I'm not being, as long as I can handle it and it's not impacting my health, then I'm not as strict about it as I probably would have been in the past.
No, I love that. It's just so funny. The longer I'm in this world, I yet to see anybody angry doing this diet. Everybody's like, yeah, we feel great and it's really chill and we can help you if you want.
I'm telling you, exactly. And that's like most of the people. They're like, we're here. We're just spreading good information. We just want to help. There's no money. We're not, the carnivore community is not like it's a money making community. It's not. There might be some bloggers that do, offer some counseling or coaching, but that's probably the extent of it. And most people just want to share their message.
Well, maybe we need to get more. Maybe we need to get more organized and get a bunch of carnivores together, and we'll go like throw some kale juice on, a farmer or something and protest. I don't know.
Seriously.
So we've been talking about you and your health, but you started feeding your kids this way, and I'm always so curious about this. What kinds of behavior changes, if any, did you notice in your kids when they started eating a cleaner diet this way?
I mean, I always tried to feed them healthy. They probably have always eaten healthier than I have. But then it kind of switched as they got older and they started to want other things. So I'm not now that they're kind of teen and preteen, I'm not as strict with them. I know that they're going to want to try and experience that stuff anyway and make their own decisions. But I still try for the most part to keep them in my house to buy healthy choices for them. But so I never really struggled too much with, I never bought cereal or things like that. And, highly processed things. Now I'll buy them like a bag. Once in a while they'll have chips and guacamole and, so we're not hardcore or strict with their nutrition now, but definitely for the most part, they've been pretty stable. Like they haven't really struggled too much with behavior issues.
That's great. No, it's something that people, say if I'm starting nutrition coaching with somebody and they'll say like, well, I could eat this way, but my kids would never eat this way. They have to eat kid foods. And I understand that might be challenging, but it's funny. Like everybody I ask who has kids and is doing this, they all pretty much say the same thing that you just did. Like it's not terribly difficult. The kids kind of like this food anyway.
Right. And I never did that. Like whenever we would go out to eat, there was never like separate chicken fingers and kitty type foods. Like it was always a big person meal. And when I cooked, I didn't cook separate little things for them. Like they just had what I made. If it was meat and vegetables, they would get meat and vegetables. So I feel like they also just got used to having more real food. And again, their diet's not perfect by any means. They're teens and they're with their friends and they're they're parented separately. And, so it's not 100% perfect diet, but I feel like I gave them the best start that I possibly could. And so we didn't really have too many of those struggles.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you can't live their lives no matter what you do. You can only live your own life, but at least you've set them up for success. And, if they eat foods that make them feel bad, maybe they'll want to eat better down the road. It's their lesson to learn. I just think that the setup is so amazing. Yeah. And I wish so much that I would be given that gift. It sounds like you or I were not given that opportunity too much.
Correct. Right. And I don't think even I don't know your age, but I'm a child of the 80s and early 90s. And I don't think it was even known at the time.
No, totally. I mean, when my mom, I'm 37. My mom was diagnosed with cancer around, 1998 or something. And so we switched to a really healthy diet of whole grain bread and skim milk. So it wasn't
Yeah.
exactly like
Yeah.
everything that we know today, for sure. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
curious. I'm curious with you. We talked a little about your kids, but when did you start to notice that certain, those physical things that you were talking about started to feel better and kind of resolve themselves?
I'd say there was a huge difference when I switched from, again, just cutting out gluten, dairy, soy. But then when I was paleo, I noticed when I was doing my blog that I was making a lot of paleo desserts, and there was a lot of paleo treats. And it wasn't so much low carb or low sugar, but it was more, just trying to eat more real food. So it was definitely a huge step in the right direction. But I still struggled a lot with hormonal imbalances and issues surrounding my hormones and my thyroid, especially. So I did dive into some mild stints of keto, and I didn't do so great with the mega high fat, especially with digesting. So I think switching over to carnivores when I think your question, I'm like talking so much that I'm forgetting your original question, but I think you asked when I made the switch, when I started to feel better. And I think it was probably around when I started switching to more hardcore carnivore and sticking with meats and cutting out. Because a lot of people don't know that something that you're taught is healthy, like broccoli, for some people, some of the ingredients in some of the components of broccoli can trigger autoimmune issues and things like that. So cutting all of that out made a huge difference. And that's when I started to really feel amazing.
Wow. And I love that you've already said this, that you didn't have to do that, strictly for the rest of your life. You used it as a tool for a very specific thing for a very specific time. And then after that was over, you got to open up your diet back up again. I think a lot of people are afraid of carnivore because they think they have to be on it for the rest of their life or they can't ever get off it. You know what I mean?
Right. And it feels very restrictive when you're used to having so many food options. And I like to talk a lot about this because you see a lot of people sharing information on people who eat these specific types of diets having some sort of dysphoric condition relating to food or eating disorder. They you're being too restrictive and that's not healthy. Not really understanding that unless you're sick, it's really hard to understand that cutting certain foods out is actually saving and helping your health. It's not impacting your health. And that, like you said, there's always that option to try and reintroduce. And for me, even if I didn't reintroduce anything and I had to live on meat for the rest of my life, there's so many. I don't feel restricted because I'm satiated and I'm full and I'm not having those blood sugar spikes and plummets. I'm not on that blood sugar roller coaster. Stable mood, stable energy. My hormone health has improved so much that I just, I didn't know what it was like to not feel this deep darkness sometimes and just waking up at night with dread and doom. And now I don't have that anymore. I don't there's a lot of brain chemistry things that have been resolved for me, which for me is huge. And so I feel like unless you really struggle with autoimmune conditions and all these other underlying health issues, it's hard to really understand the restriction. And some people want to do it just for weight loss, but for me, it was definitely that was not one of my personal goals for it. It was more for just to help my health improve, and it has drastically.
Wow, I love that. I'm so glad you brought up, the eating disorder thing. We have to be very, very conscious of that around here. Bethany struggled with an eating disorder when she was in her teens, and it's
Hmm.
funny. Like if I told somebody on the street, like, yeah, my wife's on a carnivore diet, she eats 3 different kinds of food ever, and she had an eating disorder, most people would be like, "What the hell are you doing? Like, that's a terrible idea." But if you were to see like the plates and plates of food that she can eat, like it's so great for her, and she's happy and full all the time. And yeah, it just
Yeah.
improves everything about her life. Her digestion is way better. Again, her energy is so good. Like it's
Yes.
not restrictive.
Yes. I totally agree with you on all of that. It's hard for people to wrap their brains around that. That's been a big struggle, especially with Western dietitians, because they're trained as, very specific nutrients that they think are being absorbed and needed. We're actually, because a lot of these plant phytolectins and that interfere with our ability to absorb nutrients and digest and assimilate our food properly, it's impacting the brain health, which is impacting those types of disorders surrounding food. So it's eating this way can be very healing, and it can also heal a lot of inflammation in the brain, which can contribute to all types of anxiety, depression, mood disorders, everything. Like I said, that's been like a huge impact for me, is to just not feel that darkness and that heaviness that I used to experience, and just simply by changing my diet. So I do, and I know it doesn't work that way for everyone, and there's all different other things to take into consideration, toxins that are stored in the body and all of that. But I feel like it's definitely a huge step in the right direction. If you're struggling with health issues, why not give it a shot and see, with, like you said, in the back of your mind, like, if I want to reintroduce something and my body handles it okay, then okay. But right now my priority is my health, and not looking at it as a disordered way of thinking or eating, but as a way to get your body back in better order.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. I'm very fortunate. Haven't really dealt with a lot of depression, anxiety. I definitely have times in my life where I've had more or less of it. But that was the thing that really
Mm-hmm.
surprised me the most, is when I went to a more strict carnivore diet, my mental clarity and spirituality and gratitude just went off the charts to a level that was so
Yes.
consistent and stable and present all the time. It stunned me. And so I can't relate to being in a very, very dark place for a really long time, but I can absolutely see how this
Yep.
diet would help somebody just crush some of those things and just feel so much more clear and better and more grateful.
Yes, I completely agree. And also addressing anything underlying that might be contributing to it, addressing those childhood wounds that we all have, and digging deeper and doing the personal development work doesn't hurt. But I feel like for me personally, my absolute best mental health results, and what helped give me that introspection on those things to help me heal from them, has been going carnivore.
It's like an adjunct. It's like one more tool in the toolbox that can help you with all kinds of different things. The way I look at it, I love that. You wrote Forties on
Yeah.
Fire, and I'm curious to hear when that kind of idea started to come into your mind, that you wanted to create some content and then eventually write a book. Was it something like that, or what made you decide to write that book?
I've always wanted to write a book, and for me, the premise of the book is really focusing on females in their 40s. And a lot of times you're going through what's known as perimenopause. So it's not menopause, it's the period before losing your period. And women are often labeled like all kinds of things when they're going through this, crazy and hormonal and moody. And I wanted to talk about not only honoring our moods and the things that come up around that time, because a lot of times we just bury stuff deep within us throughout our cycle. But this is a time when you have that cycle, that all that stuff kind of comes up. So I wanted to write a book about honoring all of being a female in her 40s, and looking at it as a positive thing. Like your sexuality gets better, your everything in your life can gain more clarity. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a hormonal wreck. You can balance your hormones in your 40s and feel good. So I wanted to cover everything that, including play and getting adequate sunlight and getting enough sleep. We don't talk enough about sleep, and we are very, our culture in general, we don't value sleep. It's kind of our bottom priority, but it should be the most important priority over anything. So I talk about all of that in the book, and I just wanted to help women in their 40s to feel like they're not just crazy and hormonal, and like this is not just how it's going to be, but this is a time when, if you do have that underlying leaky gut and you do have underlying health issues, a lot of autoimmune and hormone and thyroid issues and all of that, that's when it really starts to peak. So that's the best time to start paying attention to everything that you need to address in your life, so that it doesn't become so it does become an amazing decade.
So is the book written for women in their 40s, or is it written for women, the busy executive in her 20s who is working way too hard and not sleeping enough, or the busy woman in her 30s who is starting to see some of these autoimmune conditions start to show themselves, thyroid issues, things like that? Could it also benefit, younger females by catching some of that stuff a little bit early?
Oh, absolutely. I've had some younger friends who read it and loved it, and they thought it really helped them to prepare for when they hit their 40s. So it can really benefit women at any age. And even I've had some men read the book and really love it and review it and everything as well, because these are all practices, and it's very simple. I don't go too in depth, but just how these simple changes and practices can really help benefit your life. And they can benefit anyone. Balancing your hormones is important for anyone, not just women in their 40s. So I did kind of pigeonhole myself a little bit by calling it 40s on Fire, but I also really wanted to honor women in their 40s and the struggle, because that's who I was primarily writing to.
Yeah, no, I love that. So, there's all kinds of different things that we could talk about and different lifestyle changes. In your opinion, which lever produces the most results when you pull it?
For me, it's hard to say, because I really think sleep is up there, but I think sleep is the number one neglected and probably makes the hugest impact. But I would say also just cutting out those foods that are going to contribute to not being able to absorb nutrients in your diet and not being able to heal your digestion. So those strong foods that we hear a lot about, like gluten, dairy, soy.
Yeah, I think soy is probably a pretty big one up on that list as well. Talking about sleep, is it a quantity issue for most people, or is it a quality issue for most people? And how can people improve their sleep? Like, what tips or tricks do you recommend?
I recommend for sleep, making sure you are winding down and shutting down and not being so on devices and light and bright lights and everything a couple hours before bed. Also getting that early morning sunlight on your skin, which helps to produce adequate melatonin so you can fall asleep at a decent time at night. And then just trying to have good sleep hygiene. So trying to go to bed at the same time most nights per week and getting up at the same time most nights per week helps a lot with establishing your internal clock, your internal rhythm.
Yeah.
So you get those deeper levels of sleep. Blue light blocking glasses, I still recommend those, especially before bed, because of the impact that artificial light can have on our sleep long term as well.
I was going to ask you, I think of any lifestyle change I ever ask somebody to try, turning off electronics is probably up there as one of the hardest things. And so I'm glad you mentioned blue light blocking glasses. I was going to ask you, are you the superwoman who is the only person on the planet who doesn't stay up until 11 p.m. watching Schitt's Creek like the rest of us?
Oh my God, I did not watch that show. No, but I had been on a different schedule, and I did kind of change my schedule quite a bit. I had been going to bed 8:30 and getting up at 4 and then going to like 5:30 a.m. CrossFit. I no longer CrossFit. I now, because I'm taking evening classes and doing ju-jitsu, I'm staying up a little later and sleeping a little later. So it's definitely changed. But my thing is it's just to make sure you try to stay on the same schedule, even if it has to shift a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I really like that. That's been, easier for us if we're kind of following that same schedule and staying more consistent, like even on weekends. We just tend to feel better when we do that. You've mentioned something a few times now, which is sunlight. And Kathryn, we all know that if you get outside and get sunshine, you are definitely going to get skin cancer, right?
Oh my goodness. That's a very frustrating topic for me because again, it's so, that's so ingrained in our culture that it's hard to fight back against that. But getting adequate sunlight, it really helps to, again, set your rhythm for the day, but it also helps with getting adequate vitamin D absorption in your body. It also helps balance your hormones, and there's a lot of benefits to getting adequate sunlight.
Where did the idea come from that like the sun is all of a sudden like bad for us after, millions of years of evolution?
I think that the increase in using products to block the sun is definitely contributing to a lot of these skin cancers. I don't think it's directly related to having sun exposure, but also a lot of people don't understand the diet connection. So when you're eating these highly processed vegetable oils and seed oils that are rancid and can really muck up our cells in our body, that's the biggest contributing factor to getting a sunburn, which is also the biggest contributing factor to skin cancer. So we're blaming the sun, but again, it's an underlying nutrition issue it would make a big difference if you cut out those vegetable and seed oils and stuck with more animal-based fats.
Wow, I love that. I used to burn all the time. I would use tons of sunscreen. I wasn't eating a ton of seed oils, but it definitely wasn't something I was like avoiding like the plague like I do now. And I would always burn. I would burn all the time. And a sunscreen, commercial product really only deactivates one type of ray from the sun. So all it does is prevent you from getting a burn, but you're still getting the damaging rays. And then they're interacting with seed oils, which you mentioned, vegetable oils, which go rancid when exposed to light, heat, and air. Think about that. Think about that. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. No, I agree.
And then we blame the sun.
We blame the sun. And I did notice personally, at first I was like, wait a second, just by not having vegetable oils and these processed foods in my diet, I'm not going to burn. I'm like, I've always burned. That's ridiculous. It's true. I went this entire summer, and I'm pretty fair skinned, without using sunscreen most of the time when I was in the sun, and I didn't burn. And I got to the point where I was over an hour a day of sun exposure. I would go at lunchtime and just lay out in the sun, and it didn't impact. I didn't burn. I just tanned. So I was like, oh, wow, this really is making a huge difference. So and when it's the burns that lead to these skin conditions and skin cancers. So if you're not burning, I mean, I'm not saying it's completely 100%, but if you're not burning, you're decreasing your risk of that.
Yeah, for sure. We talked to Nadine Artemis, who told us, a burn is definitely not ideal, but it's your body's way of releasing that energy. And that's why you get that kind of reddish hue in your skin. So definitely don't try to burn yourself. But you're right. Like if you can build up a bit of a foundation and get, a bit of a tan going, that's your natural protection. And we took a trip to Mexico in May. I mean, full sun all day. UV index was like 13. I didn't even know it went up that high. And we didn't use a drop of sunscreen the whole time. And we got tan and it was great. It was totally fine. What are some tips and tricks that you like to give for people to develop that, to start to, be exposed to the sun in safe ways that can help them later on when they want to spend more time in the sun?
I would say, like you said, just build it up gradually. Start off, even if you can, ideally get that morning sun on your skin, because that sets your circadian rhythm and your body's ability to produce adequate melatonin to sleep at night. But so, getting that early morning sun on your skin and on your face, but also throughout the day, even if you go in little blocks. A lot of people have to work, they're in buildings, just getting out in the sun as much as possible is going to make a difference. And then also making those dietary changes, cutting out those highly volatile vegetable oils, canola oils, those liquid at room temperature oils sitting on the supermarket shelves, and also any processed foods that have those oils in them as well is going to make a huge difference. And sticking to more, again, just healthier animal-based fats are going to be very protective as well.
I love that. I love that you mentioned the melatonin connection to daylight, sunlight, because I think a lot of people would think like, well, wait a second, you're telling me not to get blue light exposure. And it's like, well, it's just a certain time. Like hormones are not good or bad. They shouldn't be high all the time or low all the time. Like people talk about cortisol, like cortisol is bad. Like, no, it's not. It's what makes you awake and alert and alive and paying attention to stuff. It doesn't mean you want your cortisol to be, through the roof at 3 a.m, but it sure is great to have it high at 8 a.m. And I like to explain to people, it's almost like
it's good for protection.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. You wouldn't be able to fight off an invader if you were like super chill with no cortisol, like, yo, what's up? But I almost explain it to people like, think of a pendulum and you want that pendulum to swing really wide. If you're getting daytime sunlight exposure, that swings the pendulum really hard one way, so that then later on, when it is time to not have blue light and not have time, not the great time for cortisol, you want melatonin, that really good, like get good sleep type hormone, to be really high. That sets you up to have that happen for you.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more.
Love that. What about movement? What should we, and in particular, like women in their 40s, be thinking about as far as movement?
Really just, I think, cumulative, getting up and moving more frequently throughout the day is one of the most important things, not sitting all day. So setting a timer, even if you have like a desk job, like every hour, getting up and stretching and moving and going for a little walk and, just getting up and moving around. Small amounts of movement throughout the day. I also think there's a huge benefit for women in terms of strength training, so that you keep your bones and muscles strong as you age. But also, you can there's anti-aging and strength and muscle benefits to just doing body weight exercises and not even needing to be lifting heavy weights. So it's, again, people think you have to be in the gym and you have to be lifting heavy weights, but that's not necessarily the case. You can still get the benefits just by doing some simple push-ups and pull-ups and body weight things that you're going against the resistance of your own body weight is very helpful as well. Women can overtrain too. And I went to a place with that when I was doing CrossFit, where it was probably contributing to my inflammation more than my health. So it's, again, finding that middle of the ground that's going to be best for your body. And for some people, they do great with CrossFit. For me, I loved it, and I loved my CrossFit family, and I had the best time, but it would constantly knock me into autoimmune issues because my autoimmune would get flared up by the added stress on my body.
That's actually something I was going to ask you about. If there was a particular reason why you stopped doing CrossFit and started doing ju-jitsu, which is much more, technical in nature versus, so physical. I was going to ask if you had some type of injury or something that, made you think like, this probably isn't best to do all the time.
Yeah, I did. I started off doing both. And I've been watching my kids do jujitsu for a few years before I started. And I was so curious of it, and it just looked so fun to me. But at the same time, it's a male dominated sport, and it was, a lot of intense, physical. And I was, afraid of injury, afraid of hurting somebody. I had like a lot of fears surrounding it. But I'm finding that it's a very gentle movement. It's a nice flow. And I think it's great because I'm still tightening and using all my muscles to the point where for the first time in my life, I have abs, which I've never had actual abs. But I think because you're constantly in this, holding these very specific positions tightly, that you still gain strength from it. Like I'm still getting strong, and I'm still getting muscle definition and tone, and I'm still getting that movement and exercise and cardio all wrapped into one. And I just feel like it's a lot gentler on my body. Whereas lifting the heavy weights, I would get really puffy and inflamed. I'm not experiencing that inflammation with jujitsu.
That's great.
And I feel like it's and it's better for my mental health. I love the meditative factor because when you're rolling with somebody, you're not really thinking about anything except your next move and, keeping the roll going and submitting the person, or, just it puts you in a very flow state, which I think is good for brain health as well.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned CrossFit family, and nobody does community and tribalism like CrossFit does. They are incredible about that. But jiu-jitsu seems so similar, where you show up, you're struggling with the same people, day after day, week after week. It seems like you could also develop really close ties and a really great community around that. Is that true?
Yes, I actually just wrote a piece on my experiences of growth through my first year of jiu-jitsu, because I came in as a female, a small framed female, to a male dominated sport. So it was definitely, quite the transition. And one of the things I wrote about in this piece was my experiences with all these different people on the mat, and being one of the only few females. And people come to it from all different backgrounds. You have people with special needs there, and you have people with all different socioeconomic backgrounds. You have serious people, funny people, like all different people. But when you're on the mat, all that matters is that you're all on the mat together doing the same work. You're all doing the same work. You're all working on yourself. Everybody's working on themselves and just trying to improve their jiu-jitsu skills. So we all have the same goal. And it does feel like it took me a while to get to that place where it felt like I had a family and a community, but it does feel like that. And it's a really good feeling to have that all these people would have my back and be there for me if I needed help with something. And it's nice to have that sense of community. I think is so important.
Wow. Yeah, I totally love that. We can't talk about movement with you without talking about the importance of women in particular strengthening the pelvic wall. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why that's so important?
It's part of our core. The pelvic wall is definitely part of our core. It's something that you don't want to lose, because that can contribute to issues down the line when you're older with struggling with incontinence. And keeping everything in the pelvic wall tight and firm is going to help your whole core stay strong. So there's a lot of benefits to that. And also for your sexual health, for women's sexual health, a lot of times sex can become painful. Strengthening your pelvic wall helps with that as well. There's so many health benefits to that as well. Definitely. And I think that it's often that part of, especially women who have had children, that part of care is often just overlooked. And I feel like it's such an important thing to take into consideration and to work towards and to fix as well, that it doesn't tend to be up there on the level of importance, but it has a huge impact on long-term health for sure.
Yeah, love that. Couldn't agree more. Tell us how spirituality fits in with all of this as well.
Oh my goodness. So when I went to graduate school, I studied movement. I studied rehabilitation counseling and disability studies. And the school that I went to, their logo was Mind, Body, Spirit. I went to Springfield College and their logo was Mind, Body, Spirit. And that always stuck with me because it's kind of like the three-legged stool. And if you knock one of those legs off the stool, then something's going to it's going to throw everything else off. I feel like we need to have something that we see as bigger than us to help us to gain some perspective and understanding. And even if that thing that we see that's bigger than us means just our higher self, just going deeper into understanding ourselves, that it doesn't have to be a dogmatic religious approach where it can be, and that can work for some people, but for some people it works better to just know that there's something bigger, because if you have that belief system and something like that to hold on to, it gives you more clarity, more purpose, more direction, more drive, and you're no longer abandoning yourself. And I think that's an important thing to always take into consideration, is to look for that and to have that and to find that, whatever it means to you, which is different for everyone. But I think it's important to just have that sense of something bigger, something greater, universe, love, God. Some people see it as just their higher self, their soul, something greater than ourselves. Otherwise, we get stuck in that protective mode of me, myself, and I. And nowadays, we live in a very self-centered world. So having something greater, I think, can help with empathy and compassion as well.
I love that. If I can ask you, for you personally, what components of spirituality are the most important in your own life?
Prayer. I think prayer is important to me in terms of it just being very meditative, very relaxing. It feels like I'm having a conversation with someone where I can spill everything out and nothing needs to come. I don't need to listen in return. I don't need to respond. And it takes a weight off my shoulder, and I feel guarded and protected. So I think prayer is very important to me. And connect. I've been making a real effort just to make that effort to connect with my higher self and something bigger than myself and my ego, but trying to understand all the underlying things that we suffer from, all our worries, all our fears, all our darknesses, all our anxieties. They're just understanding that as the human condition and seeing beyond it. I think, again, if you can see that in yourself, then you can see it better in other people and understand why they make the choices they make. And even if you disagree with someone else's choices, you can get out of your head with it and see more clearly that it's really not about you. It's about their own struggles. So if you don't have that, you don't gain that clarity and understanding, it can be where you get really stuck in some places that are not beneficial to you. That makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. It's a good recipe for a lot of suffering, needless suffering that you're going to have to go through until you add those pieces to your life. So I absolutely love that. Your book has been out for a bit now. I'm curious to know if there's anything you would go back and maybe change or add or take away from the book since it's been out.
Yeah, I need to update it. Actually, it was definitely more of a nutrition stuff. I would definitely put a lot more information in it on carnivore, because I hadn't explored carnivore yet when I wrote it, and it's changed my life so drastically that I think I would I'm even considering just writing about just my carnivore experiences. So definitely I would add that to it. But everything else, I think I would probably keep pretty much the same. I would maybe include a little bit more of my spirituality insights because they're always growing and changing. But for the most part, it's basic information, and it's kind of giving resources for people to be able to dig deeper into any of those areas and learn more.
Yeah, that's great. I love asking authors, what they'd be willing to change. And I love it when they answer like, no, I feel like I got it pretty well down, besides some new experiences you've had. Are you planning on writing another one anytime soon?
I do want to. I've been pondering what I want to write about and whether I want to write about more spirituality topics, more relationship topics, like all those types of things are kind of swirling through my brain. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to write about, but I always have a lot of ideas and thoughts swirling around, and I love to write. It's such a great outlet for me. So I'm definitely making an effort to do more writing.
Yeah, I love that. You are a very good writer. I love your blog and reading all your articles there. Selfishly, I've got a question.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very sincere. Selfishly, I've got a question that I don't even know how to phrase in 2021. I don't know who's going to get triggered by this. I'm sure I'll get a million emails or something, but I want to ask, how can the male role help support the female role? I mean, we have a fairly traditional marriage. I'm a guy. Like, what things can I do to help support, my partner as, we're going through life and going through the aging process as well?
Oh man, I love that question. That's an amazing question. I've been doing a lot of reading on male and female energy, male and female dynamics, healthy, happy relationships. So even by you asking me that, it like really fired me up, and it's making me think like I really want to write about this. So I think it's a wonderful question. So women in general, we are a little bit, or female energy. So not even women so much, but people who carry more of the feminine essence and the feminine energy tend to be a little bit more ungrounded, a little more creative, playful, a little bit more making decisions based on feelings that might not necessarily be the ultimate decision, but making spur of the moment decisions that aren't really thought out, because we tend to make decisions based on feelings versus based on reality. And men in general tend to be a little bit more grounded and a little bit more able to make sound decisions and lead. And I feel like women feel better when they don't have to have the burden of making all the decisions. They can relax into their feminine essence and experience more joy and freedom in their lives when they allow to be led by the masculine. So in my opinion, from my own personal experiences and a lot of reading I've been doing on this particular topic, I think being able to stand strong through the female storm, because female energy can be very stormy, being able to stand rooted through that without wavering, without backing down and letting your stuff get in the way, but just being able to stand and be a strong leader and a strong standing person in her life would make a huge difference. Definitely.
I love that
answer. Just rooted and grounded, being able to lead, being able to make the decisions confidently, that I think would actually take a lot of burden off, because women don't want to be standing in, I say women, but I say I don't want to leave anyone out. So people who have more of a feminine energy to them, or feminine essence, it can be highly stressful to have to make a bunch of decisions. And sometimes those decisions are not very logically made, because we tend to think and lead from our emotions. So having to not have to worry about making those, and just having somebody who can stand grounded and be a good leader in the relationship, I think that would be ideal.
I love that. That's great advice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for addressing that. Like I said, it's tough, with all the gender stuff going on.
And I, with all the yes, I'm trying to be political here and not offend anyone. At the same time, I have swayed. I've definitely swayed quite a bit, and I feel I've moved more in the direction of a more traditional role approach, working best for. I don't think the way we're doing it now is working the best. Mm-hmm. So, and there's a lot more to explore on that topic, but that is what, I don't know if you've heard of the book, The Way of the Superior Man by David Deida.
I've heard of it. It's been on my radar for a little while, but I haven't read it. No.
Oh, definitely read that one.
Awesome.
You'll love that.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Awesome. What a very well thought out and thoughtful answer. We really appreciate that. Anything else you're working on for the future?
Not that I can think of at the moment.
Nice. That's not a bad answer. That is not a bad answer at all. How do you work with people? What way do you prefer to, see clients work with people? Do you do that one-on-one or group settings, or how does that work?
Right now, just through word of mouth. I'm mostly doing editing right now, and editing and writing, that type of work. I work for Rehabilitation Health. I manage some of their health websites, and I also do my own writing, my own blogging, and I do a lot of editing for people. But I still take nutrition clients, and I just typically it's through word of mouth. I haven't been doing too much advertising.
Cool. Oh, that's great. That's a great way to start to build, a group of people. If you're getting referrals, that means you're just doing great work. So that's awesome. This has been an amazing conversation. We've covered a lot of ground. What is one simple thing you would like to distill down to the listener if they had to walk away from this conversation with just one thing?
I would say honor yourself and don't neglect yourself. Dig deeper for answers. Be your own self-advocate. Don't go by one answer that one particular doctor tells you. Keep digging and really try to find the root of what's going on and make those small, simple changes and just keep taking steps in the right direction.
It's unfortunate that has to be what you say for the piece of advice, but it's absolutely true, and it's great advice for today's day and age, and I just couldn't agree more. Katheryn Kos, thank you so much for appearing on our show. Where can people go to connect with you and find your work?
I am on www.primalmusings.com, and I'm active on Instagram at primal_musings. I do share a lot of spirituality type stuff on there.
Yeah, it's great. I've loved following you on Instagram, not only for that content, but again, the pictures of the beautiful, beautiful area of the planet you're in with all the colors changing. It's just really awesome to see. So definitely highly recommend that. Katheryn Kos, thank you so much again for everything that you've gone through. Thank you for being your own advocate and then sharing that journey with others so that they can be aware of that as well. Again, it's unfortunate that has to be the advice that you leave us with, but it's very, very good advice. And we're so grateful for you and your work and for taking the time to be on our show today. We're very grateful for that. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was nice to chat.
Yeah, it was a great chat. Such an honor. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.